Welcome. I'm Grace Ann Frederico, Executive Director of the Manatee County Bar Association, and I'm here today with our bar president, Steve Dye. As part of our Manatee Bar Historical Project, we are here today interviewing what we consider our vintage attorneys. Now we have one of our legends, Patricia Petruff. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's my pleasure to interview Patricia Petruff. Might be some mistake because I don't consider her vintage yet, but she is important. So to start us off, Patti, why don't you describe where you grew up?
I was born in Miami Beach, in a hospital in Miami Beach. Of course, it's now a condominium. And I grew up in unincorporated Dade County, far north in Dade County, about where the stadium is now. And went to public schools and graduated from Norland High School, went to Berry University, was Berry College, Miami Shores for a year, and that didn't work out for me because it was an all-girls school. And then I transferred to University of Florida, where I graduated in special education and then went back to law school.
So how did you decide to switch from education to law school?
Two reasons. Number one, when you are a teacher, you only grow up to be a teacher. If you want to do anything more than be a teacher, you have to have extended education. You need a master's in administration or something. The other reason is my college roommate wanted to be a lawyer, and she didn't want to take the LSAT by herself, so she paid for me to go with her and take the LSAT. And I got a much higher score than she did. And I went, maybe I should go to law school. So I did.
Wow, did you have any interest in law before that?
Not particularly, because I enjoyed teaching. I do like to teach.
That's great.
Do you remember approximately how many females were in your class?
Oh, if there were a dozen, 20 maybe. It was the era at University of Florida when a woman entered a law school classroom, the men shuffled their feet and hissed.
And so how big was the class, to get a perspective of the percentage?
200 or 300.
Okay. So, so you went to law school. How did you go about finding your first job?
During law school, I had to work to pay tuition. And the best job, there were two types of jobs you can get in law school. You could be a law clerk for lawyers in Gainesville, and because there was a plethora of law students who wanted to be law clerks, they paid like, I don't know, $1.85 an hour. Or you could work at the Eastern Water Law Center or the National Technical Information Service, which had a contract with the Eastern Water Law Center, and they paid $4 an hour. So that's what I did. So I worked and got an understanding of environmental law, and Michelle Boardman Grimes, who was one of my classmates, she wanted to relocate to this area because she was dating Caleb, and she had heard about a job at the Dye firm, and she said, "Oh, you like environmental law, why don't you go interview?" So I have Michelle Grimes to thank.
That's interesting. So you had an interest in the environmental law segment or practice while in law school?
Yes, only because of that job. I was, when you start law school, you take just a variety of law classes and you try to go, well, what do I like? What do I want to be when I grow up? And I got into that field, and it was new at the time because the Clean Water Act had just been, was only a couple of years old, and the NPDES program had just been started. So it was a really groundbreaking area of the law. So I thought, oh, there won't be very many of these kind of attorneys around. good one, let's do that.
Good idea. So can you recall interviewing with the Dye firm and how that went?
Oh, it was very interesting.
That's a good question.
Can't wait to hear.
Interviewing with the Dye firm was very interesting. I sent my resume. I got a letter back that invited me down for an interview. And I interviewed with your father, who was the senior partner of the law firm. And then I interviewed again with Ken Cleary, who was the next named partner. I think we went out to lunch probably at Morrison's buffet or cafeteria, which was at the mall at the time. Dale Price was in the firm then, and he wasn't all that keen about having, well, nobody was all that keen about having a woman in the firm. I shouldn't target Dale for that. And then at some point, I went out to the yacht club for appetizers, early dinner, something with your mother and father. And your mother, Stephen's mother's named Charlotte. So Charlotte looked at Dewey and asked Dewey what law school I had gone to. And I remember Dewey looking at Charlotte and saying, Charlotte, we wouldn't have even interviewed her unless she had gone to University of Florida. And in that family, Mrs. Dye went to Florida State University, which at the time was, of course, the girls' school.
Sure.
That's funny. Well, you must have passed the test of Charlotte that night. So then you, I guess, received notice, received a letter or something that they were offering you a position, and you moved to Bradenton?
Yes, I moved to Bradenton. I got a stunning salary at the time. I think it was $9,500 a year. When I passed the bar, I think I got a $1,000 raise. And I moved into apartments, and they're still there at the corner of 26th and Cortez Road. Back then, I think they were called Willow Run or something. They have a different name now. I got there with, I think, $50 in my pocket and no furniture.
What year was that? Do you remember?
Oh, yes. It was 1978, June of 1978.
Okay. So starting out your legal career, Dewey was the sort of the environmental law guy. The law was developing right then, land use law. How would you describe your apprenticeship, or how you were getting trained in the area that you ended up practicing?
Your father was a great lawyer. Dewey was a great lawyer, and he was very, very smart and very strategic. And Dewey would agonize for, 15 minutes about whether to use the word and, whether to use the word or whether to use and/or. And so very meticulous about drafting and communicating with words, which worked for me. And
As a education major.
Yes, as an education major. And then I just went everywhere, every hearing, every meeting, did all the legal research. Sometimes I felt like I was the chauffeur, because if we went up to Swift Mud or Department of Environmental Protection in Tampa, I would always drive, and he would work. He would be working on his briefs or his letters or whatever when I'm driving. But I went everywhere and learned a lot just by osmosis.
So you shadowed him a lot.
Yep.
And did they start turning over things to you individually to work on?
They had to, because your dad had a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
Soon after I maybe 2 years in, your dad had a heart attack, and there was nobody else in the firm but me that knew all about his files. And so sometimes I would be with Mr. Cleary, Ken Cleary, and Ken would be talking to the client, and I would be writing Ken notes about what to say. But eventually, I took on more and more of that load as your dad recovered from his heart attack.
What was your experience interacting with the other women in the office? The secretarial staff. There weren't paralegals back then. And then it wasn't Judy Kavanaugh. She was a part of the firm in that era.
Judy Kavanaugh was a part of the firm for a couple of years, and she had her own set of clients, and I did some work for her. So, for instance, I helped her with Tidy Island, and she was more active in the Florida Bar than I've ever been. She was the head of the environmental law section of the Florida Bar, and she had various interests in terms of some of the work she did. But she wasn't there that long.
Yeah. What about interaction with the ladies, the secretarial staff, you coming in as a lawyer? Was that
No,
difficult?
the staff was great. I think they were excited that finally somebody broke the glass ceiling, I guess, as it were. Dewey's secretary, who of course you grew up with, Bessie Blunt. Mm-hmm. Then now, or when she died, it was Bessie Sands.
Yes.
She was a wonderful, mother hen to me. And every time I'd get frustrated, she said, "Darling, you have to do something to 5 o'clock. Just go do it."
That's good advice.
So how about as a sort of a pioneer woman lawyer in a field back then that was dominated by men, including the judges and including the government officials that you deal with? Can you recall any interesting incidents where you sort of had to break them in? That you were the next big thing?
Actually, yes, there were some very interesting incidents. For the longest time, when I went to court, because that's part of the training, Dietrich taught me how to do real estate, and probably Mr. Cleary taught me how to do contracts. Bob Scott taught me how to do wills. And so back then you would do a rotation through all of the type of law that your firm did, not just environmental. And so I would go to court from time to time, whether it was for a probate or an estate or something, a trespass, different things, dog bites. And so every time I went to the courthouse here and in Sarasota, the judge would ask to see my bar card. And finally I challenged whatever judge it was, and I said, Mr. Smith over there, or whatever, Mr. Jones over there, he's 5 years younger than me. Are you asking to see his bar card? And they're like, what? And I'm like, just a question, Your Honor. And then there were some judges that I also had to ask them to call me they would call me the kind of terms they should only call their daughters or daughter-in-laws, like sweetheart or honey, or, you're looking nice today, that kind of thing. And they would call me Patti, they might call me Patricia, but they would never call me Miss Petruff. But they would, if they were talking to Stephen, they would call him Mr. Dye. And so that was a power thing in my mind. And so I stopped at one point and said, Your Honor, I give you respect. You're calling my colleague over here, Mr. Jones, Mr. Smith. I said, would you please call me Miss Petruff? and that was a showstopper for a while.
Sure.
So, but yeah, so that was, I did that for several years, and, you know, I know that there was a nickname for me in town, and I know what it is, and there was always, you know, when anybody talked about me, they would call me by that lovely nickname.
So after you started your practice with the Dye firm, got going, you joined the Manatee Bar Association.
Yes, and the law firm, the Dye law firm, that was mandatory.
Okay. As well as Dress for Success, right? Dewey would
Yes.
give you a paperback copy of Dress for Success.
Yes, I had that, and I was also sent to Dale Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie.
Really?
Yeah, then you're ready to go. So you eventually became president of the Bar Association in 1987. Can you fill us in on that experience and kind of how you rose in the ranks and became president?
It wasn't so much rising in the ranks. It was someone, I don't know who, I believe Robert Pickett was supposed to be the incoming president, and Mr. Pickett decided to move, and he left town, so there was an open slot, and just like now, it's often the bigger firms that would fill those bar positions. And so I believe that I had been on the board, but I certainly wasn't in rotation yet to be president. But I think someone decided it was time. It was our firm's year. And so it was like, hey, we think you should be president. I'm like, no. And they're like, yes, you're going to be president. I'm like, what? And so that's how it happened. It wasn't by like acclaim of the membership.
So were you the first female bar president?
Yes, I was.
And what was the Bar Association like back in 1987?
It was much smaller, and there were, by then, so that would be almost 10 years. So I'd been practicing for 9 years then. By then there were other women attorneys, but the other women attorneys were doing mostly in-house work, you know, like wills or contracts or real estate closings. I was the only one that was out there doing county commission meetings and controversial type things.
But there was no executive director then, correct? Was Sue Revel?
No, Sue Revel came, I think she came shortly thereafter. I don't think there was an executive director. I don't remember. I don't think there was.
Yeah, I don't know the year she came.
I don't think there was.
So what you've been very involved in the community in different organizations. Can you describe some of the things you've been involved in outside of the law practice that have been rewarding?
I have been very involved with Just for Girls, AKA Manatee County Girls Club. I've been the president twice. I'm now on the Manatee Girls Club Foundation board. And so that's been a pretty constant in my life. I was on the inaugural committee of the Manatee Memorial Hospital Women's Health Committee, which was during the era when the hospital finally decided that maybe women's health was different. And they put in a wing, a maternity wing, and did a lot of initiatives to upgrade how they dealt with women's health issues. I was involved with Manatee County Nursery School. I was also the president of that. I did a lot of not-for-profit legal work for different for the one-stop center and for different places to help them get their zoning. I got the Lemur Foundation permits so that they could put their fence high enough so the lemurs couldn't escape. So yeah, I like being involved with different things. It's a lot of fun. Mostly I focus on women and children's issues.
You've raised a few guide dogs too.
Oh, that's right. I think I raised 5 or 6 guide dog puppies, and I had one of their brood dogs, female dogs, and she whelped out a couple of litters for the guide dog school.
You recently retired as the city attorney for Holmes Beach, and so your practice has not just been representing clients in front of government bodies, but also representing government itself. Do you have a few words about reflections on retirement from City of Holmes Beach? Because you did that for a lot of years. And
I did that for probably almost 30 years.
that's amazing.
I think it was 9 mayors that I served under. It's a good type of practice because it's always different. You know, city, county, and local government law can be anything from union negotiations to environmental issues. You know, there's a whole lot in between. And it's interesting dealing with people, and your people change all the time. Usually the staff remains somewhat constant, but the policymakers change all the time. And so you never know what direction the local government might move towards when new people are elected. But it was a good field because if you're appearing in front of those kind of bodies, it's nice to know how it works from the other side. To be able to do both sides of the table, I think, makes you a better lawyer.
Well, are you having better evenings without attending those meetings on the island?
Well, my last meeting was December 14th, so I haven't really got to luxuriate in having my Tuesdays and Thursday nights free.
So I know they're going to miss having you out there refereeing. Skipping forward into the modern times, the bar now, well, I don't know if it's the bar, but law schools, and I know in University of Florida as well, are now around somewhere between 60 and 70% females. And I believe even in Manatee County, I think our judicial body is about 50-50 now. And so what is your thoughts on the direction the bar is going? Is it appears to have gone from at the beginning of your career to just a very small percentage to it, at least now, the era we're in right now, it's looking like it's going to stay a majority of females, and how do you think that's going to affect the practice of law?
Well, we're playing the long game here. I mean, this was our plan from the very beginning, actually. I think
it's working.
I know it's working. We're very thrilled with our progress thus far. I think it is a good thing because it is my belief that women look at the law differently than men, and I don't ever want to go into a courtroom again because, as I explained to my colleagues, there's way too much testosterone in the courtroom. At least there was back in the day. It doesn't always have to be a war or a competition, and I think having more women practicing law may bring that level of aggression down a little bit, because, from the way I've always practiced is I just want a solution that is practical, that works for everyone without spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get there. There's no reason to fight over, who gets the dog, for instance, in a divorce. So.
You've had a fantastic career, and you're still just going strong. Do you feel at this point in your life that you would have rather done something else if you could start from scratch?
That's a tough question because I've really enjoyed my legal career, and I have enjoyed being what I would call a bigger fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big pond, which is why I didn't go back to Miami. Even in 1978, Miami was too big, too many lawyers, too much of that aggression kind of practice of law, and I didn't want any part of that. The only other profession that I thought over the years that might have been of interest to me is that stockbroker thing.
Yeah, it looks like an easy thing compared to what we've done. What advice would you give a young person today who's thinking about going to law school, trying to decide their direction in their career, or even a young attorney who is looking to you for advice that aren't quite sure what they want to do with their career?
I think practice of law is very different than it used to be because of the technology. And so the first thing, if someone wants to practice law, they're going to have to be very, very technology savvy. I mean, in the last year or 2 years with COVID, I had to learn 5 different internet platforms to talk to my clients. They all couldn't use just Zoom, God forbid. They used every other platform, GoToMeetings, Microsoft Meetings, Google Meetings. And so if you're not technically savvy, it's going to be really difficult. And it's also difficult, it will be a more difficult profession because people don't understand that it takes time to get to results or even to do the research to give them an opinion. And so they don't understand why it costs so much. And so I think it's going to be much, much harder for people to make a living being a lawyer. So I'm not sure it would be the first profession that I would suggest if I was mentoring high school kids and they're like, oh, I want to be a lawyer. I'm like, maybe an engineer. Do that. Do that. Because I think it's much more difficult these days to be a lawyer than it was when I started out. It's just harder.
I've got to ask you this, going back to the beginning. So Patricia and I work together and have for years, and we'll collaborate on some of the same matters. And she'll ask me to send a letter to somebody or even an email. And I'll sometimes take it to her and say, well, can you make sure this is right, what we really want to say? And I'll get back lots of little red lines on the grammar. So I need to know, would Dewey do that to you when you were under his guidance? Or is that just a Patti Petruff thing?
No. That is an old school thing to make every word count and not have any additional words than you need to communicate. And I remember Dave Dietrich, for instance, I guess he might be interviewed later. Dave Dietrich never used 10 words when 100 would do better. I mean,
We're going to cut his interview off, right? Right.
Dave used sometimes way too many words. And I know that was, so whoever trained Dave didn't manage to pound it into his head, but your father did. He red lines, 3 times, 5 times. It didn't matter till it was right, the letter.
But you actually put a grade on my paper.
Well, that was because you were so young.
It's usually like a C or lower. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think it's still a great profession, and for women, I think it's easier than some professions to work part-time or to collaborate with someone so you can have more time to have children and raise them. It can be better for that. I mean, if you're a school teacher, obviously you have to show up at school every day. Your kids have to be in daycare. If you're an attorney, not so much. I mean, I used to bring all those guide dog puppies to work.
Right.
So you have I think, more flexibility. And I think law firms, at least some of the bigger ones, they are recognizing that now. So it's not that I wouldn't recommend being a lawyer, but I would say I think it's going to be keep getting harder and harder because of all the things available on the internet. People are trying to write their own wills on the internet, and of course they're never right when they do that. But they think they can do things. I have that coffee mug that says, "Don't mistake your Google search for my law education." So.
I like that.
I do too.
Patti, during the years as you've practiced, there's been just numerous changes in society, into the legal system. What are your thoughts on has the legal system gotten better? Has it improved during your tenure, or has it gotten worse, or is about the same?
Well, I think progress is always good. Change, everything changes. You have to accept the change or you'll be left in the dust. In terms of practicing law here in Manatee County and in the state of Florida, I think it has gotten easier in terms of the expectations. So for instance, when I first came to town, I was always in a dress or a skirt with a little jacket and a little tied bow right here. And that was an expectation. When I went to college at the Berry College, now Berry University, I had to wear a dress or skirts. Obviously women can dress differently now, just as the men don't have to wear a full suit to go to the courthouse. So that's better, more comfortable. We don't all look like little robots.
We don't dress for success anymore.
No, we don't dress for success anymore. But I have the book in case you want to give it to your daughter-in-law-to-be or something. With respect to the shift in the dynamics of the profession, having more women gives that different perspective, and so I think it's easier. It's easier with the back and forth. Obviously sometimes there's always hiccups with that, but still there are more women commissioners. For a long time, Pat Glass was the only county commissioner, and then more women got elected, and that was good. And women, I think, sometimes care about different things than men in terms of whether it's childcare, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's schools. And I'm not saying that men don't care about those things, but having women in positions of authority just brings a different voice to the table. So from that perspective, I think it's helpful both in the legal profession and in all the other professions. It used to be, when I was young, you grew up to either be a school teacher or a nurse. And those were kind of the two options. And then suddenly that little law school option became available, and you know, here I am. But those were not options. You know, young women, when I graduated from high school, I was not eligible to go to any of the U.S. academies, Air Force, Naval, anything, nothing. That came like the next year or the year after, and I feel horrible for those women who were the first women there. And because being, you know, one of the few women in law school was no picnic either. Mm-hmm. So I think it has improved from that aspect, and women are being treated as equals more often than they used to be, and they're being respected more often than they used to be. So that goes across most segments of our society. You know, we have women police chiefs, and we have women mayors, and et cetera. So it is a good thing, and it's going to be interesting in the future to see how that dynamic, whether it keeps shifting or whether it sort of remains kind of that 50-50.
One last question. What are your thoughts as a municipal attorney, as a government attorney, on the rise in the politics of the community, and how people are attending those meetings and expressing some pretty strong opinions, and how has that changed over the years, sort of the political activism of the community?
It's, in my opinion, it's always good for people to be involved in their community. What is not good in the last half a decade maybe, but really more pronounced in the last 2.5 years, is the level of rage, the level of anger that accompanies those opinions. And it's everywhere. It's not just in our public forums. You know, you don't try to make eye contact with anybody at a red light. You know, it's just,
Right.
you don't, you know, this used to be a town, and to a certain extent it still is, where you would say good morning to everyone on Main Street. And now it's 50-50 if someone will even talk back. You know, a lot of people will go, oh, good morning, but that used to be standard here. And so some of it may be growing pains, but some of it is that, if we want to call it that, political divide, and that is not a healthy thing. That's not a healthy thing. And every issue can't be solved by politicians. You know, it just can't. So the traffic problem, it takes time and money, lots of money, to solve traffic problems. You know, there will always be, in my estimation, there will always be poor people that need help. And, you know, so there's always going to be those type of very critical issues, and anger is not going to help solve them. And so that is a problem in local governments. Why we didn't used to have armed police at our meetings, and now we do, and that's not good.
Well, thank you for participating in this. Personally, I have enjoyed immensely practicing law with you. You're seen as a leader and a legend of the bar. You're an expert in your field of law that is, you know, I hope you keep practicing. I'm not looking forward to when you throw in the towel, because you'll be impossible to replace. So thank you very much for sharing with us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.